Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality. It may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody. This is Natasha Helfer. This is the Natasha Helfer Podcast, where we bring down shame any way we can. That's the goal here at this podcast, especially on issues that have to do with sexuality, religion, mental health, all things that tend to be a little bit taboo and that people have a lot of big feelings about. So those are the kinds of things we try to talk about. And today I am thrilled to have Dr. Jordan Rullo here with me. She is one of my colleagues here in the Salt Lake City area. And I'll just read off her bio really quick and then give her the platform to talk a little bit more about herself. But she's a board certified clinical health psychologist, certified sex therapist, and supervisor through AASECT. She's a certified Gottman Therapist. She's an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Clinical Psychology here at the University of Utah, has a private practice in Salt Lake, and teaches online sexual health courses at sexualhealthsolutions.com. Her areas of specialty includes couples and sexual health, which is what we'll be discussing today, sexual dysfunction, and sexual health related to menopause and cancer. And she presents on sexual health nationally, internationally, and has published tons, over 24 peer-reviewed articles on the topic of sexual health. So I'm just so pleased to have you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, lovely. Well, why don't you give us a more personal bio and what got you interested in this whole field of study, and how in the heck did you end up in Utah?
Yeah. Okay, so starting from the beginning, but not way from the beginning. When I went to college at Indiana University, which is the home of the Kinsey Institute, but I didn't know any of that at that time. I went to Indiana because I actually wanted to do journalism advertising.
Oh, wow.
And I thought ooh, I'm going to be like a Don Draper. This will be amazing. And got into the field and was kind of working in that in my first couple of years of college. And then I realized, this isn't it. This isn't doing it for me. And then I thought, well, why was I interested in this in the first place? And I was really interested in what made people tick, what influenced people. That's how the whole advertising thing was the initial kind of interest. And then I thought, well, that's psychology. So midway through college, changed my major to psychology. And then realized if I want to go to grad school, I've got to get some research experience. And it was at that time that the Kinsey Institute, which I had never heard of, sent an email out saying, hey, we're looking for research assistants. And it was on a sexual pain study. It was just data entry on a sexual pain study. And I thought, well, I don't know, sure, why not? And started doing research at Kinsey, just data entry. And I would go into the Kinsey Institute each day to work, and there's just erotic photos lining the hallways, and there's a museum area with just phallic statues. I'm like, this is amazing. People get paid to do this. And then that was it. I just kind of fell in love. So I continued with the psychology piece, but then specialized in sexual health. And how I came to Utah is when I was applying to different graduate schools, I did a poster presentation. This was at Indiana. I did a poster presentation, and the man who eventually became my advisor at Utah, he came to my poster, and so I'm giving my poster presentation. And he's like, "Oh, are you applying to grad school?" I'm like, "Yeah, next year." And he's like, "Have you thought about the University of Utah?" And I'm like, "No, I'm from Chicago. I've not thought about Utah." And I was like, "No, I've not. Utah has not gone through my mind." And he's like, "Well, you should think about it. We've got a good sex research program there." So he put it on my radar. And sure enough, at the time, this isn't the case now, but at the time, the University of Utah had a really phenomenal sex research program. So I ended up applying to Utah and got accepted, and the rest is history.
Wow. That's super exciting. Well, I mean, there's quite a bit of cultural difference between Chicago and
Yeah, there is. Yeah, yeah.
so,
But I did go to, I went to Catholic school, Catholic high school. So I grew up in a very, very Catholic environment. So there is there's some similarities.
yeah, right. With what we might call purity culture or religious standards of behavior, right? As far as large swaths of populations that have different either beliefs or standards or roles that sexuality play in their lives, and then both the benefits and costs that come with that. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, so as we tee up the topic of coupled sex therapy, where do you want to start? I mean, that's something a lot of people have heard of couples counseling.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have probably tried some type of marriage therapy if they've had any type of issue in their lives. And a lot of times those kinds of sessions are dealing with what a lot of people seem to come in with: communication problems, conflict problems, maybe issues on, differences in how they parent or how they spend money. But we do know through the research that sexuality is a big reason why folks struggle in their primary relationships. And yet the research also shows that not a lot of couples counseling covers sex.
Yes. Which is exactly, I mean, I love you. You teed me up perfectly. We didn't even plan for this. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background, and then I'll jump into exactly what you teed me up for. When I first became a certified sex therapist, and I had no training in couples. And so I started doing sex therapy work, and occasionally would see couples as a part of that sex therapy work, but I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And I soon realized, if you are going to do good sex therapy, you have got to work with all parties who are having that sex. So if one person's coming with a sexual function concern, let's say it's low desire or erectile dysfunction, and they have a sexual partner and that partner is not in the room, you are missing 50% of the equation on how to treat this issue. And there's some research showing that treating the couple when it comes to a sexual health issue is more effective than treating the individual. So a few years into my kind of independent practice, I'm like, I have got to figure out how to be a good couples therapist. You cannot be a good sex therapist unless you also are a good couples therapist. If the person in your office is having sex with someone else, that someone else has got to be there. Again, you're only getting half the equation if that only one person is in the office. So my kind of PSA is, look, if you have a sexual health issue, if you're unhappy in your sexual relationship, you got to be in the office, and your partner or partners got to be in the office. If you really effectively want to treat this sexual health issue, both people or peoples need to be there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's so interesting because my initial background was marriage and family therapy, right? I went to marriage and family therapy school. And then 10 years later, I got interested in becoming accredited as a sex therapist. And I feel the same way, like with you. Like, I felt like, well, my marriage and family therapy training didn't give me a whole lot of sex.
Yeah.
My sex therapy training didn't give me a whole lot of couples, right? Even though I already kind of had that expertise. So I just find it so interesting, even in the field, that we kind of separate these two.
Yeah.
I think would go more hand in hand. Yes.
I was diving into the research in preparation for our talk today, and I found this neat study. Let me see if I can find the number again. When couples come in and say that one of their sexual health, one of their concerns. So if you're going to couples therapy, if you say one of your concerns is sexual health, only 41% of the time will your therapist actually address that sexual health piece.
Wow.
So
even if the person brings it up, it's still not.
Even if the person brings it up and said, hey, I'm coming to because, we have communication issues. Oh, and we're having, sexual problems. And only 41% of the time am I giving you the right number? I wrote this down. And over 40% of the time the issue is not addressed. Over 40% of the time the issue is not addressed.
Wow.
Even when it's specifically brought up. And this is exactly what you're talking about. It's that couples therapists, LMFT, or people who just go into specialize in couples therapy do not get adequate training in sex therapy. And sex therapists do not get adequate training in couples therapy. And even being AASECT certified, only recently, I think it's only been in the past 3 years or so, has AASECT required that to be certified, you need 16 hours of couples therapy training. That's it. Just 16 hours of couples therapy training to be a certified sex therapist. So these two fields, couples therapy and sex therapy, just have not been like properly integrated. When like, what? If you're dealing with sex, you're dealing with multiple people, more than likely.
Yeah. Yeah. They have not been in bed together, which is sad.
Yes, that's one way to put it. They have not been together.
We need to help their sexual relationship of the fields.
Symmetry is now offering ketamine services. To find out more, go to simcounseling.com/ketamine-services.
Well, so let's go back to this. I have seen this a lot for a lot of different reasons where you're saying, within the partnership, they kind of decide who the problem is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So they decide, okay, well, is it your low libido? Is it your high libido?
Yep.
Is it your dysfunction, right? So you've got vaginismus, or you've got erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation, or even in the cases of like infidelity work, it feels almost like for the person who's been betrayed, like, oh, now I have to go do extra work. Like, you go figure out your problem.
Yeah.
Why you cheated on me, right? Or, and so a lot of times I get an individual who's showing up my office, and after the first assessment, I'm like, oh, why are you the only one here? Why are you the only one that came to this appointment? So what do you have to say about how and why people organize these things in this way?
So I just want to highlight exactly what you're saying. Typically, one person is told in so many words, they are broken. You're the broken one and you need to get fixed. And it depends on the sexual function concern. If it is low desire, it's the low desire person that's told you're broken and you need to get it fixed. Your desire should match my desire, which is high. Erectile dysfunction, it's that person with the erectile dysfunction that's told you're broken, you need to get fixed. And so often I have individuals in my office that say, my partner doesn't want to come here because they say, like, it's my problem. It's my problem. I got to fix it. And I can see that. I can see, okay, well, you have the erectile difficulties, or you're the one who can't orgasm. Well, that's your issue. You need to fix it. So on paper, that makes sense. But it's, if that issue, if you're having difficulty, if that issue is manifesting in the context of a relationship, then it is not, just like by definition, it is not one person's problem. It is both people's problem. If one person is unhappy in a relationship, then it isn't, then both people. It is not good for both people. It is a dynamic that develops. And so you've got to work on the dynamic, not just saying one person is broken, which is why it is so important in couples therapy that both people show up. Because when both people are showing up, what they're saying is, this is us. This is an us thing. We're going to tackle this as teammates. We're not blaming each other. This is a teammate issue that we're going to figure out how to put our heads together and solve this, which is going to increase the effectiveness of the issue being addressed. But it is just, even with regular old couples therapy that has nothing to do with sex, it is the dynamic. Not one person is to blame. It's the combination of the two people and the dynamic that they create. That's what needs to get addressed. The patterns that keep getting repeated, which patterns, whatever patterns, how do I want to describe this? Whatever patterns are happening in a non-sexual relationship, one person approaches, the other person withdraws, there's criticism, defensiveness. You see the same exact patterns in the sexual relationship. You cannot just look at sex in a vacuum and say it's its own thing. But the same, whatever is happening in sex is typically happening in the overall sexual relationship. Long story short, this is a dynamic, and both people who create the dynamic need to be there to address the dynamic. This is not one person's broken, which I unfortunately hear that so often.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, just even in the religious sphere or the populations I've worked in, it's not just always the lower libido partner that gets brought in. It's the higher libido partner, right?
Good point. Yeah.
Well, you've got a sex addiction, or why is sex so important to you? It shouldn't matter that much, right? So those kinds of, things are being thought of, back in the kind of home the home realm. And as you were talking about couples coming in together, my partner was just diagnosed with MS last year. And it took us like 2 years to get that diagnosis because it was kind of a complex presentation. I was at every single appointment, it was like, and you see that, right? You see that with a lot of, diabetes or heart disease. It's like the person who's going through it and the wife or the husband or the partner is there. Like, what are we going to do about this?
What are we going to do about it?
Right. How are we going to change our diet at home? Right. Or how are we going to have to function differently at home?
Yeah. Could you imagine if you told your partner, oh, you've got MS? Hey, not my problem. Deal with that and let me know when it's fixed.
Right. Right. And then on top of it, to treat them kind of like they're at fault. Like this is, which is what happens a lot with sexuality. It's like, well, you are doing something to hurt me. So it's not just like medical problems where we're like, oh, you're dealing with that. It's like, no, you're dealing with something that impacts me. And now I have my own feelings about that. And my feelings oftentimes come out in not so great ways, like erectile dysfunction, for example, right?
Yes.
I've had a lot of female partners and gay male partners that are just super lovely about it and super kind, and others that are just angry, so angry that this penis is not responding in the way that they were hoping it would respond. Yes. What were you going to say?
Well, and I think I love that you brought up and I'm sorry your partner got that diagnosis. And I think it's a really helpful analogy because your partner gets a diagnosis of any chronic health condition, let's just say MS, and there aren't myths or expectations in society about how you're supposed to, like, I doubt you took that personal, like, oh, my partner got MS because they don't love me anymore. But when it comes to sexual functioning issues, just the way society talks about sexual health and sexual function and what it should mean and expectations, oftentimes the other partner takes it personally. Oh, you're not able to get an erection? You don't find me attractive? You don't want to have sex with me? Oh, you have low desire? Is there something wrong with me? So it's taken personally. We have expectations of how things should be. Your body should function this way. Our sex should be this way. We should be having sex this often. And when you don't meet those shoulds, then you've fallen short of those expectations. So you're at fault. And also people take it personally, which with most, I think, chronic health, like cancer diagnosis, I think one partner doesn't often say like, oh, do you not love me anymore because you have cancer? So it's fascinating that you add a sex piece to the health concern and all of a sudden it's just, it is interpreted in such a different filter.
Yeah, right. Because it's all about, I believe, this ownership model that most of us come from, where we were going to belong to each other. And the sex story is just a love story. It's not a physiological story. It's not a hormonal story. It's not a trauma story. It's not all the many things that we know can impact our sexual health. We just look through this lens of, but isn't it all about love?
Yeah. If we love each other, shouldn't this just work? Wouldn't we be having sex more frequently? Right. You bring up it's such a good, I love the way you describe that. Because sex there's a health component. So I'm board certified as a clinical health psychologist. I chose to get certified in health psychology because there is such a physiological, biological component of sex. There's a health piece. It's not just about love or lust. There's a physiological piece to it that makes it sometimes not work the way that you wish it would.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we are both obviously very much in agreement that if there's a health issue, whether it's physical or sexual or mental, it's actually really, I think best practice for a primary partner or partners to be involved in that treatment outcome, right?
Yes.
And treatment development and everything, just to kind of know, like, how do I play into this? Do I understand what's happening? What are my roles in this? How do I interact with this issue? And how do we see this as a we issue, not one that's broken? Okay.
And so piggybacking off of that, and just in my experience, I think couples come in for couples sex therapy with maybe 2 to 3 different pathways. One is they come in and say, we have a sexual health concern, and it really is a health issue. This is, erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation or inability to reach orgasm. So that's a sexual functioning issue, and that is what brings them in. I think pathway 2 is no one has any sexual functioning problems. Or there's nothing physiological, biological. There's not a dysfunction per se. Sex just is not satisfying because there are some core aspects of the relationship, like the level of friendship between both people, how they communicate, their trust within each other, how they respect each other. There are core relationship issues that are causing this sexual dissatisfaction. And then I think the third pathway is a combo. Sometimes there is a sexual dysfunction, like erectile dysfunction, and there's also trust, friendship, respect, these other core kind of foundational pieces in the relationship that are struggling. So I really see these 3 pathways. Are we dealing with the sexual dysfunction? Is there no sexual dysfunction, but there's just some foundational pieces of this relationship that need to be worked on? And we see in the research, this is from the type of couples therapy I do is Gottman method. But in Gottman's research, he wrote this phenomenal book called The Science of Trust, where he talks a lot about this. But in his research, what he's found is that the friendship, your trust with your partner, and the respect level, those 3 things are the core foundation, are the prerequisites to have a satisfying sexual relationship. And so absolutely, I will see couples that come in and say, there's no sexual dysfunction here. It's just that we have a very dissatisfying sexual relationship, and then come to find out it's because they basically hate each other, or they are not good friends. The last time they had fun together, they can't even remember. They don't respect each other. To see the way that they talk to each other in sessions so cruelly. If you don't think your partner likes you or cares for you, you're probably not going to want to have sex with them. Does not mean you have a sexual dysfunction. It means that there's an issue, there's a break in the foundation in your relationship. And then the third pathway is that both issues might be at play, a dysfunction and some break in the kind of the foundation of the relationship.
Yeah. Where would you put into either one of those 3 categories, or create a different category, just differences in what I call like erotic interest or templates, or meaning that, what turns me on and what I'm excited about, what I want to try isn't necessarily what you're into. So again, not a dysfunction. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with, I don't know, if I like blowjobs and you don't, there's not like one of us who's dysfunctional or have a dysfunction issue, but now there's a tension in that, what I would like to do with you isn't necessarily what you would like to do with me.
Yes. Ooh, such a good question. I might create a new category, because I'm thinking like that. So there's no dysfunction. This couple doesn't have a crack in there. And Gottman, he calls it the sound relationship house. It's the 9 areas that we know make a sound relationship. And the foundation of that sound relationship is the friendship, the trust, the respect. So there's no crack. The couple you're describing, there's no crack in that foundation. So the way I'm thinking, with popping in my head is, this is a couple where all is well in their relationship house. It's sound, but communication, teaching them communication and compromise would be incredibly helpful for a couple like this, where they're learning actually the tools on how to compromise on a topic like this and how to better understand what each other's core needs are. I love those couples. It is rare that I get in my office one of those couples where like all is well. Their relationship house is nice and solid. No one has a sexual dysfunction. They just need a handful of communication skills to be able to talk through and kind of figure out how, as teammates, they want to get through this. So yes, I think that's an additional category. And I love when those couples come in my office, because those are the quickest treatment plans.
Yeah. Well, and I would say a lot of times those couples do not come in with so nicely, like friendly, because some of those erotic differences have started to cause over the years, especially, unfortunately, people oftentimes wait too long to get into couples counseling. So they've had a chance for years of toxic kind of communication or sadnesses or rejections, kind of build and resentments. But a lot of times it's because of these differences, either high, low libido. That's not always physiological. That's just sometimes we just come wired differently, or things that, I want to try that you don't want to try. And so now we're not super great friends about it. We're not doing great, but we're upset about that particular issue in particular.
So good point. Like with a couple like that, it could be, there could be kind of a crack in that friendship system, or that respect. Like I'm not feeling respected because I'm telling you what I need and want. And I feel like you don't care about me, or my needs aren't important. So it could be that. It could be, I feel respected. I love you. We just can't figure out how to get through this. And then that's where it would be the communication piece, which again is rare. Oftentimes I'm seeing the couples where this has been going on for a long time and it has caused a crack in that kind of relationship foundation. And it's going on for a long time because like sex therapists are usually the last case scenario. Like what couples like, all right, let's go see a sex therapist. Yay. We are like the last person couples typically want to see. So that piece, sex therapy is expensive. Insurance typically doesn't cover it. So I think a lot of couples do wait a long time before they finally say, okay, I think we have to go see a sex therapist.
Right. Yeah. And just before we move on to two other scenarios, I'd like to just point out there that don't necessarily, because I think what you're talking about is the majority of people. But there are couples that I've seen where they have a great friendship. So all the, those respect pieces are all there.
Yeah.
Their sex life isn't doing well, that not for any, again, physiological reason necessarily, just they're not. And so they come in for that reason. And then you also have the couples that are really doing pretty horrifically, even domestic violence couples. And the one thing they'll say is, well, the one thing that really does well in our relationship is the sex. Right. There's a lot of passion, and there's a lot of almost too much passion because they're, kind of involved in some power dynamics that are not great together. So I just want to point that out that, I think in general, what you're saying, I would resonate with. There's exceptions, of course, to the rules as far as how sexuality works, which is why it's so fascinating.
Can we dive into those? I love that you brought up those categories.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just, I'm thinking out loud here. Let's talk about the couple who all is well, friendship, respect, trust, and there's no sexual dysfunction, and yet they don't have a satisfying sexual relationship. What I would wonder, with this couple, I would go back to friendship and go, do you two have fun together? Like I'm hearing there's no passion in the sexual relationship. Is there passion in the overall relationship? Like what do you two do together that where you have fun, where you let go, where you just engage in pleasure? Because oftentimes I see those couples who've been together 15, 16, 17 years and they say, we never argue. They're my best friend. But it's just like flatline. Like where is the passion? Where's the passion? Where's the excitement? What do you two do together that's novel? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I also think, especially because I work with so many people coming from religious backgrounds, that oftentimes there hasn't really been permission to be erotic. There has been permission to be friends. There has been permission to be partners, to be co-parents, right? To be like architects of our life together. But what about our erotic energy, right? And sometimes that can still be a little bit infantilized, or like, and even that kind of sense of like, we're best friends. That's not always sexy. Not always. Sometimes it is. But like in the work of Esther Perel, she talks about there being a little bit of mystery and a little bit of like eroticism, a little bit of adventure, a little bit of like, like interest, right? That it's a best friend. It's like, well, I tell you everything and, everything about me. And I think sometimes there's that erotic kind of energy missing. I also think, and this is kind of a totally different topic that we don't have to delve into, but I think that there's quite a few mixed orientation marriages that start in these kind of religious spaces where maybe the sexual chemistry wasn't really there to begin with, because of other reasons why people get married other than sexual. sexual issues. Mm-hmm.
I read recently Emily Nagoski's new book, Coming Together. I don't know if you've read that yet.
Yes, I am in the middle of it. I am interviewing her tomorrow.
Ooh, that's super exciting. So one of the things she says that I love, that I hadn't kind of thought of it this way before, she talks about Esther Perel for a moment, and her work about kind of the exotic is erotic, and Gottman. So Gottman says what I'm saying before. You need to have this strong friendship. You need to have this closeness in order for it to, it's a prerequisite for a good sexual relationship. So that's what Gottman says, where it looks like Perel is saying the opposite. No, you need mystery. You need distance. That's what drives a good sexual relationship. And the way Emily describes this is, she says, I think that what both Perel and Gottman are talking about is they agree. They both say you need to feel cared for by your partner. You need to feel like my partner cares for me. So she says, I think Perel and Gottman would agree with that. You need to feel like your partner cares for you. But this is where Perel takes it further and says, but if you feel like your partner is caretaking you, there's a difference between my partner cares for me, I feel cared for, versus I'm being caretaken. If you're being caretaken or you're caretaking your partner, you're in this parental role, and that is not sexy. That shuts down. So that's how she kind of delineates the two in their stances, that they both agree to be cared for. That is a prerequisite for a strong sexual relationship, but to be caretaken takes the sexy out. And I do see that with a lot of couples where one partner says, I feel like I have another child. I feel like my spouse is my third child because I'm caretaking.
Right. Yeah. And this gets even more complicated, as I'm sure with your, cancer work and stuff, when there is an element of caretaking that actually is part of the relationship that is now the new norm, whether my partner is sick or my partner is. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about there is, how can you, in those types of situations, still not lose that kind of hopefully erotic sense of your couplehood? Because if you're monitoring, every time somebody eats a steak after having had a heart attack, that doesn't help your erotic potential as a couple.
Yeah. The other, so that was one of the scenarios. What was the other scenario that came? Oh, couples who have like really, really high conflict, and yet they say, oh, we have really great sex.
Right.
I want to go to something else Emily said, and you'll probably talk all about this if you're interviewing her tomorrow. Another point she made that I think was pretty interesting. She talked about how when you're she calls them the pleasure adverse spaces. So if you're in grief, panic, rage, anger, those do not lend themselves to pleasure. But yet some couples, when they are in that intense anger and rage, like have this amazing sex. Mm-hmm. And she's saying, she argues and says that amazing sex you have after that massive fight is not actually for pleasure. It is for relief. Mm-hmm. So you have this, breakup sex, makeup sex, and couples typically say like, oh, I felt relieved afterward. Like, I haven't lost my partner. We're still together. We're okay. Versus, oh, that was so pleasure filled. Mm-hmm. So I wonder with those I don't see those couples very often, the high conflict where they say well, of course, they wouldn't want to come to see me. I'm a sex therapist. They don't need to work on sex. So yeah, I don't really see those couples, but I could imagine asking, hey, when you have this, amazing, passionate sex, is it pure pleasure? Is it relief that we're not losing each other, that we repaired this fight? Like, what really are you experiencing from that connection?
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think that it's less the pleasure and more the connection piece, or the, wanting to be reassured.
Yeah.
Matter, that I'm still loved, that I'm still with you. Yeah. So it's almost like a toxic intimacy, right? That's happening in those things. But as a rager myself, I find that very relieving. So I can relate. Like, that's something I need to work on. So anyway, so that's, I think all of these things I can see them all being very relevant for different kinds of people and different kinds of relationships. relationship. So, well, with the time we have left, I'd love to get into kind of, so what happens in couples sex therapy, right? What do we do? What are some approaches? What can people expect? What are some things you have found useful? That's a lot. So just, start wherever you want.
Yeah. I'll share my approach. And there are going to be other approaches based on the therapist you see and what their theoretical orientation is. But so I'm a certified Gottman method couples therapist, and Gottman, for people who know Gottman or don't know Gottman. So Gottman is a researcher, couples therapist researcher. He's followed couples for decades and identified what are the areas that make a strong relationship. And so you've heard me say a little bit earlier, I've talked about the sound relationship house. So in his research, what he found is there are 9 areas that if you're strong in those 9 areas, you probably feel pretty solid in your relationship. And he put these 9 areas in something called the sound relationship house. He just basically connected these 9 areas and put them together, and they look like a house. And there are walls of the house. The walls are trust and commitment, and the foundation is friendship, and there's varying levels in between. And Gottman method couples therapy is not sex therapy. Gottman hasn't really done a ton of stuff on research on sexual health, but he's done really solid research just on couples health. So when I work with a couple, like I said before, you cannot look at sex in a vacuum. So I at first am looking at all the 9 areas of the sound relationship house. Let's see how sound the relationship is. Are there any cracks in that foundation? Like I mentioned, the trust, respect, and friendship. Are there any cracks in the foundation? Yes or no. Are there any sexual dysfunction issues? Yes or no. Do they need a referral to a physician if there are dysfunction issues that could be physiological, biological? But let me even back up because I'm getting ahead of myself. So Gottman method. Here's how Gottman method works. If you see someone who's Gottman certified, this is probably the formula they're going to follow because this is what we get trained in. There's a 4-part assessment, pretty thorough assessment. Session 1 is 90 minutes. So it's an hour and a half. I meet with both partners, get a really good idea of their relationship. I'm watching how they communicate with each other because communication is such a good predictor of sexual health. And just, getting a good idea of what are their goals, what brings them in, their relationship story. So one of the questions I'll typically ask in those first 90 minutes is, how did you two meet? Tells you a lot of information as a couples therapist. If they're talking about their first meeting and one partner is like, ugh, yeah, I hated you from the moment I met you. I thought you were so annoying. Or if they can't remember anything positive about that first meeting, that tells you a lot about the perspective they currently have about each other now. Versus when I ask couples, tell me about when you first met. And they're like, oh my gosh, I saw you across the room and I thought you were the cutest. And then we started talking and I thought you were the funniest person I'd ever met. Like, that still shows that they like each other and they have positive things to say about each other. So it tells you how the lens in which they're seeing each other. So that's that first 90-minute session. Sessions 2 and 3 are solo sessions. So I meet with each partner individually for 45 minutes and just get a really good idea of individually what do they bring to the table? What are they bringing to the relationship? And this is also the opportunity for them to tell me things. I don't keep secrets. So if one of them tells me they're having an affair, I'm not going to keep that secret. I'll work with them on how they can share that with their partner in a future session. But these individual sessions could be nice because maybe there's something they wanted to say, but they didn't exactly know how to say it without hurting their partner's feelings. So this is their opportunity in a solo session to say, like, hey, I want to work on this. These are the sessions where I hear, I'm not as attracted to my partner as I used to be. But I don't want to say that because I don't want to hurt their feelings. So that's not necessarily a secret. It's just, okay, let's information that we can file away and we can work on this in the treatment plan. We can figure out a different way that you can bring it up to kind of minimize the damage to your partner. Then the 4th session is a feedback session. So I will take everything we've talked about. The couple will have completed some questionnaires as well, and I'll consolidate everything. And then I take that feedback session and divide it into 2. The first part of the feedback session, I very thoroughly go through the 9 areas of the sound relationship house. So I give the couple just a good overarching view of here's where your relationship, not even talking about sex yet, just here's where your overarching relationship is at when it comes to the sound relationship house. Here's friendship, communication, trust, commitment. So I go through all those areas. I check in with them. How do you feel? We all make sure we're on the same page on how they feel about their house. And areas of their house that need to be worked on, that becomes part of the treatment plan. So if they are struggling with communication, that's going to be in the treatment plan. If they're struggling with their friendship, they haven't been on a date in years, they don't have fun together, that's going in the treatment plan. So those 9 areas of the sound relationship house really nicely help figure out what do we need to address in our treatment together. So first half of the feedback session, sound relationship house. Second half of the feedback session, I give a very specific treatment plan. I only see couples whose primary concerns are related to sex. And the sound relationship house, it doesn't really address sex, although sex is fits in components of the house. It doesn't really address sex. So the second half of the feedback session is, okay, here's a very specific treatment plan. You are coming to me because you have a goal related to your sexual relationship. Here's how I think we can get there. And so, for example, an example treatment plan might be, number 1, we've got to work on trust, because there was this betrayal, 10 years ago that both of you haven't really thoroughly processed. And I hear that the resentment and the hurt continues to come up. And so I think we need to process this betrayal first. Second, I want to work on communication. I noticed in our first session, the way you two communicate with each other, there is a lot of criticism. There's a lot of defensiveness. And each of you mentioned that when you talk about sex, it gets even more difficult to have productive conversations. So I want to teach you some really clear communication skills before we even get into talking about sex. And then next, both of you said you two haven't had fun together in years. So I think we need to work on the emotional intimacy and put some small things in place where you two on a daily basis are having some level of emotional connection. And then the last piece, and then I'll say and I know you're coming to me for sex therapy, but it's the last part of the treatment plan that is going to be sex. We have got to work on this trust, get some healthier communication, get some more emotional intimacy, and then we will get to sex. And so then I say, what do y'all think? Sometimes couples will say, we don't want to do months and then get to sex. We want to get to sex right away. And so my response will be, we can do that. We can start with sex as long as you can agree that if we get held up on communication, if we get held up on that, past betrayal, we're going to circle back and do a detour. So yes, we can try to start off and jump right in with sex, but we may have to do a detour if we're finding that we're getting stuck because of some of these other issues. So once everyone agrees on the treatment plan, then therapy gets started and we start working through that treatment plan.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think that gives people kind of an idea of what this might look like. So, I have followed Gottman my whole career. I haven't gone through his certification processes, but a lot of what you're talking about is very similar to how I would kind of format the sessions as well. What's interesting, what I have found to be the case is that oftentimes there's one person pushing for the sex therapy and there's one person that's hesitant about it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I think it can be really helpful to put sex last, even though that sometimes disappoints the person who was pushing for sex therapy, because they're we're going to go see a sex therapist. They must have tons of exercises for us. We're going to be having great sex by next week.
Yes, yes.
We're going to have all this solved, which really misses the points of how people get into these sexual kind of wounds to begin with. But I think it's also a relief for the person who sometimes is hesitant, because who's usually hesitant? Well, in my experience, it's usually the low libido partner.
Yes.
It's the person who maybe isn't as erotically interested in some of the things the other person is searching for. Maybe it's the person who doesn't want to explore non-monogamy, or who, and so they feel if I'm going to go see a sex positive sex therapist,
yep,
they're going to push me to do all these things that I'm currently not super excited about or not even interested in.
Yep.
And it'll be one more way that I fail this relationship. Right?
Exactly.
That dynamic.
Yes. So oftentimes it is rare that a couple comes in and they're both equally stoked about being at sex therapy. It usually one is kind of dragging the other one. And so what I'll say is, look, let's just do this 4-part assessment. Let's just do this 4-part assessment. Let me propose a treatment plan. And then you can decide from there if you're interested, because this is only going to be effective if you're motivated to do this work. If your partner is truly dragging you in here and you are not motivated and you're actually resentful that you feel like they're making you do this therapy, then this is not going to be helpful. So if you're willing to do the 4-part assessment, hear the treatment plan, and then decide, then I think this will be a more effective scenario. And typically the exact thing happens. They hear the treatment plan and they go, oh, so you're just not going to assign me to go watch some porn next week or go get a sex swing next week. Like, we're actually going to be doing some like emotional intimacy work and communication work, and we're going to process this resentment. Okay, this sounds good. This sounds like actually what I've been needing to show up more in the sexual relationship. So I'm really thinking back, I don't think I've ever worked with a couple where after the assessment, after they hear the treatment plan, they've said, no, I changed my mind, or not I changed my mind, but I've decided, thank you, this is good, but I don't want to go forward. I think once everyone hears the treatment plan, it's like, oh, okay. And what I often say is like, couple sex therapy, like, is not sexy. Like, yeah, we're going to be working on betrayal. We're going to be working on communication. Not often is my day super sexy where I'm like, oh yeah, let's talk about like sexual resources and let's talk about erotica. Like, that doesn't happen very often. So I think once people realize how unsexy it is, it's like much more doable. It's not that scary.
Yeah, right.
I've got some.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I've got some fun, again, diving into the research. There's some really interesting things that I'd love to share just about, so few things. So couples who are unhappy in their relationship have double the odds of being sexually inactive, have double the odds of having lower sexual satisfaction, and nearly 3 times the odds of being sexually dissatisfied. So if you are unhappy in your relationship, it's significantly likely that you're going to be unhappy in all these different areas of your sexual relationship. And then this question comes, chicken and the egg. Like, were you unhappy in your sexual relationship and that made you unhappy in your overall relationship? Or were you unhappy in overall and that made you unhappy in your sexual relationship? And so there's been some research that has looked at that. And I've been super curious about this question too, because like you were saying, and I was mentioning a little bit earlier, you show a treatment plan and you're working on all the non-sexual stuff first until you get to sex. And typically the person who is excited about sex therapy gets pretty disappointed about that. Well, can't we work on the sex stuff first? And so I'm looking at the research, like, is there anything that actually says that you should work on the non-sexual stuff first? Or is it just a case-by-case basis? So a couple really interesting things came out as I was kind of diving through this research. One is, so the research shows that relationship satisfaction is a prerequisite for sexual satisfaction. So there's this one really interesting study that basically showed you've got to treat the relationship, the non-sexual relationship issues, before you can meaningfully treat the sexual issues. So that for me was pretty validating, because that's typically how treatment plan goes. We have got to treat these non-sexual issues before we can even get to the more vulnerable sexual issues. Another study that came out that I thought was really interesting showed that sexual satisfaction significantly predicts emotional intimacy. So in other words, if you feel good in your sex life, you probably feel pretty emotionally close to your partner. But flip that. If you feel emotionally close to your partner, that does not predict your sexual satisfaction. So meaning if you feel emotionally close to your partner, that doesn't translate to good sex. And so what I took from that is if you're a couples therapist and let's say they come to you and they have a sex issue, but you dismiss it. You don't specialize in sex. You just help them have a better relationship. No, I'm just going to help you to communicate better. I'm going to help you have a better relationship. Just helping a couple have a stronger emotional connection is not going to magically improve their sexual satisfaction. So like this study found, emotional closeness does not significantly influence sexual satisfaction. This used to be the stance in couples therapy that, well, we'll just help the couple be stronger in all these other areas, and then their sexual relationship should just come on board. If you communicate better, if you've got all these other things, then sex should just get better. And it doesn't magically happen that way. You could help a couple have a really strong relationship, and you still need to do sexual health interventions.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think that's where some of the critique comes for John Gottman or Sue Johnson, who focus so much on the emotional aspects of a relationship. Yes. They're great. I mean, they both have great approaches to that. At the same time, that's not always going to magically end in sexual thing. And I don't know what you have to say about my frustration with my love-hate relationship for the love languages and how that typically comes in. And how couples have kind of like diagnosed each other with what love languages they do better at. And typically, and it doesn't really matter in heterosexual relationships, whether it's the man or the woman, I get both presenting with one of them saying, well, I need sexual intimacy to feel, I feel like I need touch, and I feel like I need to feel wanted. And if I feel touched and wanted and we have good sex, then I feel emotionally close to you.
Mm-hmm.
The other person who's saying, well, I need to feel emotionally close and safe and connected and, loved. And then I want to have sex with you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, which I'm like, okay, that's an interesting way to conceptualize that. So yeah, I'd love to get your feedback on.
I hear that super often. And the way I think about that is, I think there's many different ways to think about it, but my current thinking on that, because I hear that so often. Well, let's go back to Emily Nagoski's, and this isn't her work, but she popularized the dual control model, the brake pedal, gas pedal. And brake pedal, gas pedal, this dual control model, who's the researcher who put this research together was one of my old advisors, Eric Janssen. So I want to give him the credit because Nagoski didn't come up with that, but she certainly popularized it. So the Bancroft-Janssen model, the dual control model, brake pedal, gas pedal, in order for you to have desire, reach orgasm, you name it, in order for you to sexually function, you need to have more on your gas pedal than on your brake pedal. And things that hit the brake are going to be, you're not feeling good about your body image, you don't feel well, you're tired, you're stressed. Things that hit the gas are you feel emotionally close with your partner, you have good energy, you feel good about your body. Those are all gas pedal things. So the way I think about it, that concept of, well, I need sex to feel close to you, well, I need to feel close to you to have sex, is just that people have different things that hit their brake and hit their gas. And oftentimes, and I don't want to make this super gender specific, but in my practice, it kind of is. Women just in general, and I'm just speaking to my practice, I don't want to put this on all women in the world, but listen, women in my practice, they need more ingredients. They need more ingredients in order to be able to feel sexually connected than men do. And in the end, what that looks like is the man saying, I just need sex to feel connected. And the woman saying, I need to feel connected to have sex. Women just typically in my practice have needed more ingredients. They need more context. I think this research study supports this idea for context. There are other neuropsych studies, and Nagoski talks about those in her book, but I love this study. This study, I believe, was in University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and it was an eye tracking study. And they brought men and women into a lab, and imagine you're in a lab and you're watching erotica, and you're wearing this device that tracks where your eyes are looking. And what they found, so like college student watching erotica, little tracking device, and what they found is that the men are looking at the breasts and the body parts, and the women are like, oh, those high heels are really high. Look at those curtains. Those do not match. Has anyone vacuumed those curtains in a while? So the women are all over looking, their eyes are tracking the whole context. So we know that women are just a lot more contextual. And I don't want this to be women are more demanding, or gosh, I've heard so many men say about their female partners, it's like all the stars need to be aligned. Well, you know what? For some people, and I see it a little bit more in women, and I think we have some research to back that up, there's just more ingredients that need to be in place. There's a certain context that needs to be in place. And oftentimes a big piece of that context is feeling like your partner cares for you, having that emotional intimacy. So long story short, I don't back up the idea that, well, men just need sex to be close and women just need to be close to have sex. I just think that men and women have a different set of ingredients, brake pedal, gas pedal. And if you want to have a great sexual relationship with your partner, you need to be curious about what context, what hits their brakes, what hits their gas, and be their teammate to help them get that context and those ingredients in place. But it's not as simple as I need sex to feel close. Well, I need to feel close to have sex. No, let's understand what each other's ingredients and contexts are.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I also like to put it kind of in a more ecosystemic model, which, is like, why were these things important? Why are these your gas and your brakes, and how are you socialized to think about them?
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's a lot of issues there when you think about toxic masculinity and how men, I think, are touch starved in general in our culture. And I think women in general have been given a message that there better be emotional connection for you to want to have sex. Otherwise, you're used and taken advantage of, and you can't just want sex for sex's sake, right? So I always want to insert that these are not necessarily, there may be biology involved in how we're different, the female brain versus the male brain, but there's also a lot of socialization of how we were taught about sex and the sexual scripts that we all carry with us. Yeah.
Oh, that brings up Emily's book again. If you're only like halfway through, the latter half talks about just the gender mirage is what she calls it, and that men are taught to be winners and women are taught to be givers. And just think about how that shows up in sexual relationships. I'm a man. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I bring home the bacon. Part of being a winner is you, as my partner, should give to me. I should get sex when I want to have sex. I love the latter half of that book.
Well, even the nice winners, like, in order for me to win, you have to have an orgasm.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And that's what society has taught men. You know you're a good lover if your partner's had an orgasm.
Right.
But so many. Yes, yeah. Which is like, yeah, nice winner. Like, that's really sweet.
But still winner mentality.
Yes, but still winner mentality.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, we're at the end of our time. So I just want to give you kind of just some last minute thoughts, or like, what are you excited to leave with us as far as, last minute wisdom, because you've had so many wonderful things to say today.
Oh, last minute wisdom. I would say if you are out there and you're listening and you have sexual health concerns in your relationship, consider seeing a couples therapist that also specializes in sexual health, and know that if you're dragging your partner along, just commit to the initial assessment process, and then you and your partner can kind of renegotiate if you want to move it forward. But you're not broken. This is a teammate process. It's the dynamic. This is a couples issue. This is not one person being broken that needs to be fixed. This is a couples issue.
Yes. I love that. And finding a good therapist that will work for both of you is really important. So both of you need to feel comfortable, not just one of you saying, well, but I really like them, and then the other person's like, oh. So both of you need to feel comfortable, and a good therapist will take feedback, right? So if you're like, well, I'm not ready for that, or that's not the route I'd like to go, or, can we start with something else? Or a good therapist will work with you and bring you into the treatment plan, like, initiative of what this is going to look like. So
yeah, it's collaborative
approach. Tell us where people can find you. I know I gave a little bit of that at the beginning, but tell everybody where you can be found. And
yeah, my website is just my name, jordanrullo.com. So my website, I teach online sex education for sex therapists at sexualhealthsolutions.com. And then my private practice brick and mortar is in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay, perfect. And if you wouldn't mind maybe sending me some of those articles that you referenced, then I'll put them in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Well.
Yeah.
That research that you so kindly looked up for us in preparation for this. So thank you so much, Jordan. This was a wonderful interview. I'd love to have you back on to talk about the many other things you are very expert on, like female sexual dysfunction and menopause and all kinds of things. So maybe we'll have you back.
Yeah, I'd love to be back. This was fun. This was a fun hour. Well, thank you.
All right. You take care of yourself.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Now tishki say the so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. Now tishki shade the so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. Now tishki shade the so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.